Hi, how's it going? Hopefully you can guess. This is the Antarctica informal Q&A part 1. You're welcome. Hello, you bunch of scoundrels. I was gonna do sort of a film about what worked and what didn't work, but I got so many good questions about Antarctica, I thought I would just do a Q&A, and I'm gonna actually break it into 2 parts. So there's gonna be a Q&A part 1, Q&A part 2, only because I got so many questions, and I think they're all across the board, and they're really solid. I'm also gonna do this in color because, as you can see already, there's a couple of things that I need to show you because the color element is important. So for you black and white lovers, sorry. And you might notice my Casio. How about a Casio? This is my old Garmin, which is I think 8 years old. And I'm stoked. By the way, brands that should sponsor me. Garmin, Dodge, what was the other one? Swarovski. Not really. They probably shouldn't sponsor me, but in my head, I'm like, that should be sponsored. So I have a new Garmin on the way, by the way. And I spent a fair amount of money on it. But the thing is, there's a whole bunch of new things I have, agendas for 2024, and the Garmin is a big part of it. Or a big little part of it, I should say. And I'm impressed that it lasted this one, which is nothing fancy. This is a Vivo 2 or Vivo 3 active. I've had it for that long. The only thing that's wrong with it is that it's really hard to charge now. You have to get the charge in there absolutely perfectly. Otherwise it won't charge. And then you go back to it to get it, and it's like at 2%. And it's like, hey, loser, suck it. You know what I mean? So I need to fix that. Before I get to the Q&A, and by the way, this is the internal layer of the double layering system that I got from the Expedition Kit. And this is Lindblad National Geographic symbols, but I'll talk more about that. But man, I don't know who makes this stuff, but it is warm. That is no doubt about it. Hence the need in Antarctica. Before we get started, I'm telling you, the thing... I'm getting choked up about it. The thing about mate that's different from coffee, well, there's a lot of things. The taste, number 1. The preparation, number 2. But the mental clarity, and I know this is bullshit that no one's going to be able to probably prove or track. Hang on. I'm not turning anything off for this film. You can just deal with the noise. I could get calls. The sewage situation is still active sewage. The thing about mate is that it gives you this laser mental clarity and focus without any jitters at all. It's very different from coffee. I think in some ways it's far superior to coffee. That's all I'm saying. I typically do coffee in the morning, tea or mate in the afternoon, and having been in Argentina for the last couple of weeks / Antarctica, where you see people in the airport drinking mate, you see people being arrested and their arms getting twisted, and they're like, hang on, and they're taking their last sip of mate. It's a part of the culture. But before I get started, I want to do one more thing, and this is a bonus for all you losers out there who are saying this is just a Q&A film. You guys did it again. I'm curious what you're looking at. Okay, that was a nice little 10-minute diatribe. I still got a little sinus. I could blow a snot rocket right here, but it might hit my bombilla, and that would be a tragedy. Look it up, tragedy. Every protagonist has a tragic flaw. So let's talk a little bit about Antarctica. Incredible trip. I mentioned this in my little film I released yesterday or the day before. I don't know when I'm going to release this, so I'm kind of like trying to set the table here for the order. Really fantastic, but let's just get into the questions right away. So this would be, of course, my numbering is off here. I'm using Millinote to do this. Nope, won't even let me do that. That's my fault. Okay, we're starting with question number 2, because question number 1 was not a question. It was me talking about this other film and my ideology about that, which, by the way, is just my ideology, as is the rest of this Q&A film. So I'm going to do about 6 or 8 questions here and then come back and do a part 2, which is going to be the rest of these. So number 2 is, if you had a chance to go back, what would you do differently and what would the story be? That's a great 2-part question, you sly dog. I don't know what the story is yet. And this is something I mentioned before. I stopped submitting and uploading stuff midway through the trip because I realized the place was not what I expected it to be. And I mean that in a good way. I don't remember being so kind of emotionally impacted by a place since being in the Amazon, where I was like, whoa, this place is hardcore, like hardcore place. And I find Antarctica could be the same, but not in like a danger way. It's just a place that makes apparent very quickly the power, uniqueness, fragility, and beauty of the region. It's somewhat overwhelming the first moment that you get into the ice and you're like, okay, I've seen pictures of this forever. I've got tons of friends who've gone down here. I know tons of people who've done books on the region. It's not the same as standing and looking at it. And all of a sudden you're like, whoa, that's interesting. And then there's the thousands of penguins, and then the orcas and the humpbacks and the fin whales. And then there's the emperor penguins. And we had a little moment with an emperor penguin experience that was atypical, to say the least. I'm not going to share all the details of it, but it was incredibly atypical. There were people on the ship who had been to Antarctica 200 times and had never seen anything like it. So it was great. But at the same time, you're like, ooh, I'm in a region where I feel like I'm at a party that I wasn't invited to. And the host is kind of like tolerating me, but not real thrilled that I'm there. And I had moments of that in Antarctica, as I did in the Amazon, when your body starts to decompose in the Amazon almost immediately because you're like, I don't belong here, and the insects and the heat and the water and everything. And you're the chafing, just the monumental level of personal best chafing that can happen in a swampy, mucky environment. Skip the undies. That's my advice. When you're in the Amazon, you don't even need to pack undies. Just go commando the whole time, male, female, or any way that you identify. It's safer, trust me, been there. So if I had a chance to go back, what would I do differently and what would the story be? I'm not sure what the story would be because I'm not sure what my story is I'm going to tell now because I have multiple themes going in my head. The journal was an incredible part of my trip. I did different things in the journal than I've ever done before, and it's very helpful for me making a roadmap, and we're going to talk about a book in a minute. What would I do differently? Photographically, it's very simple. Very, very simple. Woo! I would take either a 100 to 400 or a 150 to 600 or whatever brand equivalent you have. I know Sony makes a 200 to 600, Canon makes a 100 to 500. That is the preeminent lens for that environment. And remember, I do not shoot this kind of photography on a normal basis. I'm a short lens people guy. And so I knew going in that I was going to be photographing a lot of things that I'm not used to photographing. And so the 200 f2 with a 1.4 is a great lens, but in this environment, it is not a good lens to take. It's too heavy, it's too big, and frankly, it's just not long enough. It's not long enough. Antarctica is a place where you can't say, oh, I want to go over there because it's going to put me closer to my intended photographic goal, because you might be in a penguin colony and you just can't waltz across a penguin colony. You might be on a zodiac and can't get out of the zodiac, and they're certainly not going to leave you on a sheet of ice. So you're limited in terms of your body position of where you can be. It's just like a sports photographer. If you've ever shot professional baseball, football, basketball, tennis, whatever, you can't just waltz around everywhere you want. You're stuck. That's why sports guys typically have a 400 2.8. They might have a 600. They might have a 70 to 200 on the ground next to them, and they've got a wide zoom around their neck. They can't move. So the 200 was not. It was too big to take in the zodiacs. It's very heavy to hand hold for extended periods of time. My wife borrowed this 100 to 400 and an XT5, and she killed it. And I did not want to take the lens from her because she was having such a great time photographically. And I knew I was still making pictures with the setup I had, even though they might not have been quite as good as the ones that she was making. But I didn't want to take this for her. So the one time I used it was she was asleep and I went out on the deck. I'd been on the deck for 2 days in high wind and blowing snow and rain and diesel. And I was waiting for a wandering albatross, me and 2 other guys. And I waited and waited and waited. And I was like, I'm taking this lens. And as soon as I put that lens on, out of nowhere came wandering albatross, and that's looks like a C-130 coming down the ocean. And again, these things are not like landing on the back deck. There are ways out there. So with the 200, I always felt under lensed, and with this 400, I was like, oh, this is pretty good. Now this is an old tech lens. I think it was released in 2016. So ideally, Fuji comes out with a Gen 2, which I have no clue, and probably not, and how many people actually buy these, whatever. There's the new 150 to 600. I would probably go back. If I went back, I would take one of those two. Question number 3. How did the gear hold up in Antarctica? The gear held up fine, and I'm telling you, so I was the only person on board with Fuji cameras. But the Fuji cameras, the XH2 and the 50 to 140, which is what I ended up taking in the Zodiac because the 200 was too big and my wife had the 100 to 400. I was stuck. I had the 50 to 140. That's not long enough. It's frustrating being in there. I also had the Nikon with a 40 around my neck inside my jacket. And thank God, because that's the camera, when I pick it up and I look through it, it feels like me. That's the look that I've been doing since 1988, short lens, black and white. I look through, I go, this feels like me. And I shot an entire theme of images from start to finish of the trip with that camera and lens. And that's one theme that will probably end up in one zine or one book. And then I've got all the color work and the mobile phone footage and the 4K footage and slow-mo and everything else I tried to compile along the way. The camera and the lens in the Zodiac got salt water all over it. It got regular rain and snow all over it. I had a dry bag that I would continue to put it in and out, but it got wet. And my wife, her rig was the same thing, XT5 with a 100 to 400. They never faltered, nothing. And your gear got wet. It's hard to not get wet in there. And so the fault, in terms of how the gear holds up. And the other thing too is with a long lens, because I know some of you were like, well, just buy another 100 to 400 for your Nikon. The ZF is not really designed for high-speed autofocus of wildlife and birds. That's not what it's built for. I'd have to upgrade to a Z8 or something to really get the full benefit. And I spoke to someone at Nikon about this. So the ZF's not really built for that. Do I really want to fully buy into a second system? No. And when you're talking about long lens work, the Fuji frames, the files, especially on an XH2 with the 40 megapixels, they look as good or better than any other full frame system out there because I was looking at Sony files, I was looking at Canon files. One guy had a Nikon D850 with a 150 to 600. His files, they look great, but the Fujis look every bit as good. So, and also for a fraction of the cost. Everything else held up fine. What else did I have here in my notes? Each of these systems, the Nikon gives me one look and theme of images. And the Fujis give me another look and theme of images. And that's really important when it comes to bookmaking because I want as much as possible. Man, there's so many things I would do differently. So the second question, I probably shortchanged you, but whatever, I'll keep talking about it. Question number 4, what camera did you use the most? I used the XH2 and the Nikon the most. Those were around my neck all day, every day. And I had the XH2S. Sometimes in the Zodiac, I would use the XH2S with the 50 to 140. I think the autofocus on the XH2S is slightly faster and the bird tracking is slightly better than the XH2, but it's really close. And let's face it, if you're in 3 meter seas on the stern of a ship, pitching in high wind, trying to photograph a bird in flight, I don't care what system you're using, it's really difficult. It's really hard. We would hide up against the back of a smokestack because the wind was coming so hard and the spray was coming. And so you'd hide back there and either a light-mantled albatross or black-browed or giant petrel or whatever, or the wandering albatross would come and you'd be like, man, this is going to be a battle. And you'd pick up that lens. The ship's like pitching. So you're trying to pick up the bird as you're going, starting out a little wider than normal if you were lucky enough to be using a zoom. If not, with me at the 200, I'm trying to pick this thing up. And then the second that lens barrel hit the wind, it would just blow it like this. You just go like this or you'd be going all over the place. So you had to like back up against something out of the wind and try to get this. It's incredibly low percentage. But one of the other guys that I spent a lot of time with, he's kind of a scientist who was doing sort of a scientific program. He won a fellowship from Nat Geo to come on the ship and do some research. He was like, that's why I love bird photography, because it's so difficult and it's so maddening and frustrating that it makes you want to come back again and again. And so it was really difficult. But I used the Fuji XH2 and I used my Nikon, and the Nikon was around my neck inside of that expedition jacket. So no matter how hard it was raining or snow or salt spray, I could just pull it out, boom, and put it back. And that's a onesie, twosie camera. I wasn't motoring giant sequences. I was just shooting 1 or 2 frames at a time and moving on, trying to build a smaller theme. Question number 5? No, wait a minute. Not good, something you need to think about in a place like that. Okay, number 5, what about my cold weather kit? As I said before I left, I took all my Beyond layering system, from t-shirts to the pullovers, hooded pullover, which is a great thing to have in this environment. Hoods are, for me, were really important because of the wind. So I would use the Beyond hooded pullover. And then if I hadn't gotten the expedition rig, I would have used my Beyond jacket and my Beyond rain gear, and it would have worked fine. It would have been totally fine. I did not know that we were going to get these. And this is like, so this is the, I don't know what manufacturer made this. I have my guesses about who made this. But this doesn't look like much, right? It has the Lindblad and the National Geographic logo here, which is very nice. But this is a very simple looking thing. It doesn't have like a giant place for your shotgun and like extra pockets and all the geeky shit that photographers love. It's just simple, but it's really warm. So whatever the fill is on this is really good. And then on the inside, it says like Antarctica, 1966, a white continent, Shackleton, 50 years of heritage, blah, blah, blah. And then on the outside, you've got this very subtle, easy to blend in, bright orange, which is what you want when you've got people on shore and you need to spot them quickly. It's not like you're going to put people in all white and hope that you're going to return with all of them at the end of the day. But this says Lindblad, Heritage, 50 Years Antarctica, Lindblad Expeditions, National Geographic, and Antarctica since 1966. And this is waterproof, windproof, amazing thing with like a snorkel hood with fur, because, oh, who doesn't love fur? It's like, I named it, Reggie, my pet, whatever, Reggie. These are great. That stuff worked well. Somebody asked me about the gloves. I bought a sort of cheapish pair of what I would call fishing gloves on Amazon before I left because the gloves I have were not water resistant in any way, shape, or form. If I was going to change something up, I would probably get a pair of gloves that are waterproof. The ones that I bought, which are a mitten and a glove, for not only your 4 main fingers, but your thumb as well, so you can sort of operate anything you need and then go back into the mitten mode if it's getting cold. They're not waterproof. They were water resistant. And most days by the end of the first Zodiac adventure, my gloves were wet. Now, my hands never really got cold, and I've got a question here in a minute that I'm talking about the benefit of living in a place like northern New Mexico before you go to Antarctica. It's far colder here than it was in Antarctica, and so I was used to the cold. But that's about it. The hats were basic. The boots, I rented rubber boots, which were like knee-high rubber boots from them. They were insulated. They worked great. But my Eddie Bauer boots that I just bought, also for the trip, which I've been wearing in the snow here over the past days in New Mexico, they're awesome. They're super lightweight. They have great traction, and they're waterproof. I could have used those as well and been totally fine. So even if I hadn't gotten a single piece of expedition kit, I would have been totally, totally great. Number 6, what was the most surprising aspect? That's a really good question. The most surprising aspect. I think it's understanding the changes that are happening in this environment and how fragile it is. And we knew that going in. I mean, I think we live in a country, and I can only speak to the US, I can't speak to the rest of the world, even though I'm sure you guys want me to. You want me to speak for you because I'm so smart. I went to public school. And you know what? When you come out of American public school, you are a well-honed machine. You're just a savant. But anyway, we live in a country now where I would say conservatively 50% of our country, you cannot use the term climate change because they will either just shut up and tune out and go away and they won't talk to you, or they'll call you some crazy name or some conspiracy thing, or it's all fake and it's all phony. It doesn't take, I'm very fortunate because I don't align myself with any American political party, so I don't have to filter what I see, do, think, and read, and study, and understand through a political party, which is the dumbest thing we could possibly do, and yet our entire country, for the most part, does it. So I feel like I'm on an island politically where I don't filter things through a political party. I just look at what's in front of me. I look at the data. I look at the studies. And oh, by the way, on the ship, you're getting a lot of data from scientists that have been put together going back for 100 years. So you're looking at data. I don't look at that and politicize it. It's not too difficult to understand that it's melting. The Earth's getting warmer. I don't care what the cause is per se. I'm pretty sure I know what the cause is. I don't care. Earth's getting warmer. Is that a political thing? No, it's a science thing. So why is that? And when you go down there and some of the things you see, you're like, oh, that's probably not supposed to be that way. So that's kind of a surprising thing, only because it's so evident and so glaring, and you're like, okay, this is a place that screams out, don't screw this up. don't screw this place up. I felt the exact same way in the Sea of Cortez. When I'm in the Sea of Cortez and you read about what Jacques Cousteau said about the Sea of Cortez back in the 1950s, the world's aquarium, and then you look at what happened to the Sea of Cortez over the subsequent 40 years, you're like, holy cow, humans, we ruined that place. Now it's coming back, right? We have the ability to bring these places back. So at least in some ways. But the key is to don't screw it up in the first place. And so I felt very privileged to be able to witness this firsthand and say like, okay, this is a place that not only does it deserve to be protected, we have to. I don't think there's an option, and that probably is not going to happen. And I think most of the world is tuned out watching like reality TV. That's just my opinion. Number 7, what type of ship are you on? I was on the National Geographic Explorer. This is an older ship. I'm almost 100% sure it was built by General Custer here in America. And it's kind of the classic expedition ship. Nat Geo has more modern vessels, but I really like this kind of ship that we were on. And it's awesome. It's got the traditional V hull. It's super seaworthy. It's comfortable. It's small enough and maneuverable enough to get around, and it handles heavy seas. We didn't have any heavy seas. Someone said somewhere on the ship, I overheard that at one point on the Drake in this same ship a couple of years ago, they had 70-foot seas, 70, and this ship handled it. So any thoughts I had in my head of like, man, I hope the ship makes it across the Drake, we had like 3-meter seas. It was nothing. So these ships are super seaworthy. I mean, Custer knew what he was doing. Most people know him for dying at the Bighorn, but his shipbuilding skills were unparalleled. Okay, last question. How's the book coming along, and will it be for order? This is a great question. I'm going to work on multiple books. I think the black and white work lends itself to a zine, and there's a couple of other brands outside of Blurb that I'm going to make zines with just to see what these new products are. And then I'll probably do a Blurb zine as well. I'll probably use the black and white and the combination. I'm tearing up. Hang on. Delicious. I'll probably do a combination zine with Blurb / journal that is color and black and white. And I might make that one publicly for sale because it's not really a storybook. It's a journal that you could get and then modify yourself after the fact. I think that's probably the easiest thing for me to put out there that would be most interesting to most people. And as you all know, journaling to me is an essential part of being a creative. And then I need to make books for Blurb. So samples that will work for Blurb that I probably wouldn't make for myself because they would be too simple, basic, standard, just the beauty of Antarctica kind of book, which we can then use to show off different samples of what Blurb is able to make. At some point in time, when Blurb's coming out with new things, my guess is that some of this imagery will be used for that as well because there's no people. I don't need releases. I don't need a location release. None of that. It's very simple, generic sort of outdoor kind of work, and that's important. So I have a lot of bookmaking to do, but the first thing I have to do is I have to edit. The black and white work is edited, but the color is not. I shot 2,676 images total from the time I left New Mexico to the time I got back. And I need to edit the color, and then I also need to write a lot more. I have probably 10 different chapters or sort of mini themes that I've compiled. With each one of those, I have to sit with nothing else to do and write and recollect in my brain by going back through my journal, looking at some of the notes, and then writing something personal from each of those themes that will then be used for the copy in the book. And that takes time. So I could fire out something really quickly, but I don't want to do that. Okay, that's part 1. I'm going to come back and do another one of these. And by the way, this is not hair gel. This is what you get from don't wash your hair for 3 or 4 days. It's cheaper. Don't you agree?